the Starfleet life with the USS Dauntless. Are you brave enough to be a Starfleet officer? Do you have what it takes?
Greetings. I am Admiral Swart, Commanding Officer of the USS Dauntless, and this is the briefing with the Admiral for Stardate -250527.1. I am the Admiral in question, and today we're going to be talking about taking accountability. But before we get onto the topic, we're going to just do a little bit of housekeeping. Firstly, we record these sessions every Tuesday at 12:30 South African Standard Time. If you are an active duty member of the Dauntless crew, you are welcome to join us live for the recording sessions here on Discord. If you join the screening room channel at that time, then you can participate in the chat, ask questions, and so on. If you are not an active duty member of the crew, you are able to catch the recording live on YouTube, which usually works. It looks like it's working now, so that's good news for everybody. If you're not available at this time on a Tuesday, which is an admittedly awkward time, you're free to watch the videos after the fact. They will be up on YouTube on the Dauntless channel, and they also get uploaded to Facebook a little while later in the day, so you can catch them back then. If you have a question or a comment, so this is specifically for the active duty personnel who are here with me in the chat right now, please make sure that you @tag me in the comments. There's often a lively conversation going in the chat, and I can't go back and review the entire thing because it's not all directed at me. So if you want to make sure that I see a comment or a question when I get to the question section at the end, please @tag me so that it's nice and highlighted on the chat so I can spot it when I scroll back when we get there. If you are watching this after the fact and you have a comment or a question, please feel free to drop that in whatever place that you can find the video, YouTube comments, Facebook comments, or you're welcome to reach out to me directly. You can send me a private message on just about anything, and I will receive it. I'll do my best to respond to your question or comment there and then, but I might also use it as a topic suggestion for a future video. So please do reach out if you have any comments or concerns. Next is, who are we? Why are we here? So we are the USS Dauntless, which is a future-focused advocacy and action group that is at its core a Star Trek fan club. Why Star Trek? Because Star Trek is a depiction of an optimistic vision for humanity's future. A world in which most of the problems that we face today, poverty, disease, crime, etc., have largely, if not entirely, been resolved. And it is our contention that that sounds like a pretty nice world to live in. So we do what we can in the here and now to try and move the world in the future towards that idealistic ideal. So that's what we are about. That's why we're here. We're a chapter of Starfleet, the International Star Trek Fan Association Incorporated, which is the world's largest organized Star Trek fan community, which is a Starfleet-style group that models itself in a lot of ways on the fictional Starfleet as depicted in the Star Trek franchise, which is why we have ranks, uniforms, titles, and our chapters are referred to as starships. But it's not a real starship, obviously. The starship is not a ship. The starship is the crew. The USS Dauntless is one of those chapters, and it is based here in Cape Town, South Africa, but we have members in cities around the world. All right, so today's topic is a continuation of a discussion that we began some time ago, talking about the notion of accountability. Specifically, we'll be talking about what happens after you've made a mistake. So we've spoken about the positive side of accountability, taking credit for your actions when you've done good things, and we might go into more detail about that someday. But for today, we're going to be talking about the negative side of taking accountability. When you've done something wrong, what do we do next? What are the practical things about that we need to take into account when we're moving forward from that negative situation? So we're talking about taking responsibility for negative actions. So whether it's a minor inconvenience or a significant harm, how we respond to how we have acted, if we have acted negatively, is what really defines our character, both as Starfleet officers and just as human beings on the planet. You'll have to forgive my non-humanoid companion, Morsel. He is around. He's also blind and deaf. So from time to time, he will make a screaming noise because that's him asking me to go and fetch him from wherever he is and put him somewhere comfortable. Although he is perfectly capable of finding his way on his own. He's just being lazy. So we're going to tolerate that occasional squeaking noise. That's what is happening there. So please pay no attention to my non-humanoid friend. Okay, so why does it matter to take accountability for our negative actions? So mistakes are inevitable. It's just a fact of human existence. We're going to be making mistakes all the time. Some of those mistakes are going to be minor. Probably most of them will be so minor you don't even think of them as being mistakes. If you're walking down the aisle at the supermarket and you bump another shopper with your elbow, you immediately apologize and move on with your day, having forgotten about it instantly. It's not something that is going to ruin anybody's day. The harm done is probably non-existent. All that's happened is you were slightly neglectful of the space surrounding your body for a moment and put your elbow somewhere where it wasn't supposed to be. And that for the briefest second infringed on the personal space of somebody else in that orbit. That's it. Harm has been done. Harm has been compensated for. There's no need to take that any further. But when it comes to much larger mistakes, when you've made deliberate choices that have caused harm to another person, and that harm doesn't need to be physical, although it could be physical, or it could be financial. You've cost somebody money. It could be emotional. Perhaps somebody felt like they've been betrayed or misled by you or something like that. Perhaps they have been betrayed or misled by you, even which would make it even more important to do the steps that we'll be talking about today. Perhaps it's in terms of time or opportunity cost. Perhaps you've slowed somebody down in what they needed to do, which has cost them opportunity to do other things that might have been more important. There are lots of different ways in which we could cause harm to another person, either inadvertently or perhaps advertently. That doesn't sound like a right word, but it is the obvious opposite of inadvertently. So it might have deliberately caused harm to another person, and that is regrettable, and it's something that we need to take accountability for. But there is a scale of how much harm these things have do. So at the one end, you've got the bumping into the other lady at the supermarket, which is practically negligible, and it can pretty much easily be resolved with a momentary acknowledgement of the fact that you were careless with your elbow, which is usually enough to satisfy any other reasonable person who wants to make sure that you weren't nudging them on purpose and you have disrupted them in their day. That exchange, just a simple "oh, sorry," is usually enough to satisfy anybody. If that's not enough to satisfy somebody, then either they've been harmed more than you might realize. Perhaps you accidentally nudged them in a surgical wound that they're busy recovering from, or perhaps they're just having a really bad day and they're looking for somebody to take out their frustrations on. Either way, the harm is perhaps a little bit greater than you might have expected, but generally speaking, that's on the lower end of the scale of harm. And then on the other end of the scale of harm, you're talking about causing significant personal or financial or emotional injury to a person that might take them some time to recover from. And the greater the harm, I find, the less useful an apology is. So simply saying, "oh, I'm sorry," that's probably enough to satisfy things on the low end of the scale. That's usually enough. Just a simple acknowledgement that you were careless is enough to make just about anybody whole who has been only slightly inconvenienced. But as you progress up that scale of severity to greater and greater levels of harm, not only is an apology no longer sufficient, but I think that in most circumstances, once you get to a significant degree of harm, an apology is no longer necessary or required or even desired. It's no longer something that people want to hear from you if you've done them serious harm. When I say an apology, I mean it's just a straightforward, "oh, I'm sorry," or "I apologize for doing for the thing that I did." Just an apology on its own is not really all that useful in the more serious examples. But if the person that has been wronged, who for the purposes of today's discussion, we'll talk about as the victim. Now, I generally don't just enjoy describing people as victims unless they have been seriously victimized by something deliberately that happened to them. But in the in the basic fundamental course of actions here, when we're talking about somebody who has been wronged, then they are technically a victim. Even if they are a victim merely of being nudged with somebody's elbow, technically speaking, they're a victim. So we'll use the word victim just because, as far as I'm aware, there's no better word in the English language to describe what we're talking about here. Once we get to a certain degree of severity of negative outcomes for something that's been done to a victim, then it kind of is up to the victim whether or not they would find an apology useful. And useful, obviously not in a practical sense, but perhaps in an emotional sense. And if you've done something to somebody and they have been significantly wronged, it probably wouldn't hurt to ask them if an apology is something that they would want. Perhaps merely being asked if they would like an apology might be sufficient. But when we're going to do an apology should probably be public, but it should be done in the right moments. You want to make sure that the public in question are the relevant public. So perhaps if you've wronged somebody in such a way that you've embarrassed them in front of their family, then an apology should probably be delivered in front of that same audience, the people that they've been embarrassed in front of. If you've hurt somebody in their career, then apologizing to them in front of their colleagues at work is probably the best way. Again, if an apology is warranted and desired. So it's about picking the right moment. You don't want to be apologizing in front of people who are not involved or not aware of the initial circumstance. So if you've embarrassed somebody in their home among their family, apologizing to them at work in front of their colleagues was probably only going to embarrass them further. So please make sure that you're mindful about choosing the right moment and the right forum and the right audience for making an apology if you're going to be making one. But apologies aside, the general approach of taking accountability for your negative actions is very important, not only for the victim, but also for you, the person who has done the wrong thing. Again, whether you did it deliberately or not. Failing to take accountability for the thing that you've done. So that means ignoring it or denying it or deflecting blame. It damages people's trust in you. It undermines teamwork, especially if you are part of a team with a person that has been wronged. And it erodes your credibility. It makes you seem untrustworthy. It makes you look weak because taking accountability for your actions is a sign of strength. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But failing to take accountability makes you look cowardly, essentially. It indicates to people around you that you have what's called an external locus of control, which means that you are not the agent, the actor, the driving force behind the forces in your own life. You are not the driving seat of your own life. You have an external locus of control as opposed to an internal locus of control. You're allowing yourself to be dragged around by people and forces around you instead of exercising agency within your own choices. That's what it looks like to other people when you don't take responsibility for your actions. In contrast to that, taking accountability, taking responsibility for your wrongdoing fosters trust, because it shows the people around you that that even if you make the wrong choice, even if you make a bad decision, you are committed to resolving that situation, so they can trust that even if you make a mistake, you can still be relied upon, which then will strengthen the relationships that you have with those people around you. And frankly, it demonstrates leadership. It demonstrates that not only can you be trusted as a team member, but can also be trusted as somebody who can make important decisions because you are accountable for your actions. It shows that you care. It shows that you have a vested emotional interest in the people and things around you. It shows personal integrity, that you are bound by a code of honor that necessitates a commitment to truth, which is one of the secondary Starfleet values that we often talk about, which is that the first duty of a Starfleet officer is to the truth. And even if, and this is quite important, I think, even if the victim can't accept your taking accountability for your actions, which may in fact be the case. If you've really hurt somebody's feelings, they might not be prepared to accept your contrition and your legitimate attempts to rectify the situation. And they're probably justified in making that choice. But even if that is the case, the other people around you can see that you're making the effort, that you're making the reach, that you're doing what needs to be done in order to take accountability for your actions. So while you might have irreparably damaged your relationship with the victim, it will strengthen your relationships with the other people around you who can see that you are making the effort, because it's important to you both to repair the damage that you've done and also to remain steadfast to your values as a Starfleet officer. So speaking of Starfleet values, so the three principal values that we talk about all the time here are integrity, courage, and duty. Well, those aren't the only three, but those are among the three of the various Starfleet values that we talk about. And taking accountability is firmly rooted in all three of those ideals. So it takes a fair amount of courage to take responsibility, because you have to own up to something. If something bad has happened, everybody's going to automatically think bad things about the person that did that thing, right? And if you put up your hand and say, I'm the one who did the bad thing, it's reasonable to expect that people might think bad things about you as a result. So it takes some courage to do that, to step forward and honor the truth of the situation. And because of that, there is a temptation to dissemble, to try and save face, to try and obscure the facts, to try and avoid direct responsibility. But it also demonstrates dedication to stick to your word after you've given it. So if you've given your word to restore somebody after they've been injured by you, actually following through on what you've promised to do, or what you said you will do, indicates your value of dedication, which is a core Starfleet value. So first duty to the truth is avoiding the temptation to dissemble and to obscure the truth. It takes that courage to take responsibility and to step up and face negative opinions of people. And it takes dedication to stick to your word after you've given it. So what does this mean, practically speaking? Now, I've always advocated a particular framework when it comes to taking accountability that I call the 3 R's. You may have noticed that I like to break things down into threes, and today is not going to be any exception. But the 3 R's framework looks like this. The 3 R's are responsibility, repair, and avoiding repetition. Repair, responsibility, and repetition. So what do those things mean? So the first one, responsibility, firstly means to admit the mistake. Something has come to light. Oh, crap, you've done something bad. Somebody's been harmed by something that you did. Put your hand up and say, it was me. I'm the one who did that. I'm going to have to see to my non-humanoid companion before I continue, because he's just going to sit there screaming until I do something about it. Excuse me for a moment, please. Apologies for the disruption. I'm back. All right, so admitting the mistake is the first step, saying it was me, I did it. Then the next step is crucial here, which is being specific about what went wrong and the impact caused. So what went wrong is, what is the bad decision that you made that led to the harm being caused? What is it that you did really to result in that bad thing happening? So it's one thing to just say, hey, it was me, I did the thing, and then brush it away. But unless you've made it clear to the victim and to the people around you that you've actually understood what it is that you've done wrong, it's not really honest to say that you're actually taking responsibility for it, because taking responsibility for what? It's important that you break down and figure out what it is that you've done wrong. Sometimes it's obvious what you've done wrong, but you nudge somebody in the ribs. That's pretty clear what happened there. But if you've hurt somebody's feelings and perhaps they don't feel like explaining to you why they've hurt your feelings, it might take a little bit of work to try to understand what it is exactly that you did to hurt their feelings. It might not be obvious to you. So in that case, speaking to the victim might be able to provide you with that information. If the victim doesn't want to fill you in, which is not unlikely if they had hurt feelings, it wouldn't hurt to consult with other trusted people in your circle who might have some insight into the situation that might be able to fill you in on what it is exactly that you've done wrong. And figuring out what you've done wrong is a necessary, I would say, crucial part of this whole process. So understanding and articulating exactly what it is that went wrong, and also understanding what it is that your actions caused. So how understanding the harm that your actions caused. So again, you've hurt somebody's feelings in some mystery way because you said something that upset them. It might take some time to firstly figure out what it was that you said that upset them. And then it's going to take a little bit more work for you to figure out why it is that that thing upset them. Perhaps there's information that you didn't possess about that person that made them vulnerable to that specific insult or specific joke or ill-timed comment that you didn't really understand. So coming to understand that again is quite important. And easiest way to learn that information is to discuss it with the victim. Again, if the victim's not interested in discussing it with you, which is not that unlikely, rely on trusted people in your shared circles who might be able to shed some light on that for you. Then crucial next step is to identify your part in what occurred. So maybe you weren't the only one who made the mistake. Maybe you were part of a team, or you were among a group of friends who was having a conversation, and one member of that group of friends got hurt feelings by something that was discussed in the melee. And maybe it wasn't just you. Maybe it was a group of you. But it's important in a situation like that to understand what exact things that you said, what exact things that you did led to the harm being caused, and be able to clearly articulate what it is. Make sure that you understand and can explain the errors that you made and unpack what led to you making those mistakes. So figure out what the sequence of events was that led to you making that bad choice, and figuring out what it means. Now, I want to be clear that this doesn't mean figuring out who else is to blame for the thing that happened. It's about figuring out why you are to blame, how it is that you got to the situation where you made that bad decision, because the decision was yours. You made that choice. You did the thing. Maybe you were poorly informed. Maybe you based it on flawed information or faulty decisions, or any number of other situations. Perhaps somebody else told you it was okay. That is the circumstances around which you made the decision, but you still made the decision. So you are still, at least to an extent, responsible for what happened. And understanding the exact extent to which you are accountable and responsible is an important part of that process. Which then takes us to part 2, the second R, which is to repair. So repair the harm that you have caused. Taking meaningful steps to address that harm. Now, it's not necessarily always within your power to repair something that you've done to somebody. If you have accidentally injured somebody so badly that they require medical intervention, unless you are a doctor yourself, you obviously cannot repair the injury yourself. You have to rely on other skilled individuals. But there perhaps might be steps that you can take to make it up to the person involved, to try and repair the bond and the relationship that you have damaged with that person, and to make them feel whole, to make them feel like they are no longer disadvantaged by the harm that you caused. And yeah, again, it's not necessarily going to be possible for you to physically repair the harm, just depending on what the harm might be in any given situation. But understanding what it is that you can do to bring a sense of completeness back to the victim of the situation is your responsibility and part of taking accountability for your actions. So this is where apologies might come in. So making an apology, if appropriate, and must be sincere and properly timed and to the correct audience, this is where that would be. So it might be part of the repair part of the process. And then taking any other corrective actions. So perhaps somebody has hurt feelings because you habitually forget their birthday. So the corrective action there would be to do what you need to do to make sure that you don't forget their birthday. You put it in your calendar, set a reminder on your phone, ask somebody else to remind you when it pops up on their phone, that kind of thing. Take whatever corrective actions you need to do to make sure that you don't forget that person's birthday again, because it hurts their feelings when you do that. And there are these days you really have no excuse to do that. You have an infinite number of tools at your fingertips that allow you to do that. And if you're not sure how to use those tools, you can go back and find the briefing video about calendars. And the third part of that, if it's not obvious, then it's on you to try and figure out what might help to make the victim feel whole after you've done what needs to be done. So they might not be able to tell you what they need. They might not want to tell you what they need, in which case it's up to you to try and figure it out. So again, it's consulting trusted people in your circle who might have more insight into what's going on. It might mean speaking to an AI assistant about it who might be able to shed some insight on that kind of thing. It might mean doing a little bit of research to figure out what it is that you can contribute. It might require some work from you to figure out what can be done to help make this person feel whole. But that is, again, your responsibility as the person who made the bad decision to begin with. And maybe you can't do the work yourself. Maybe you can only contribute financially to it or something like that, but that's okay. We'll do whatever you can to try and make the person whole. Then the third step is the third R, to avoid repetition. So these two parts are linked, especially that taking corrective actions part that falls under repair. And that is figuring out what changes you need to make to your attitude, to your schedule, to your tool use, to your approach to conversation, to any number of other aspects of your life in order to avoid similar situations arising in future. So again, you forget somebody's birthday, what can I do to make sure that I don't forget their birthday again? I've hurt somebody's feelings by addressing them incorrectly. How do I make sure that I remember to address them properly in future? I've nudged somebody with an elbow in the supermarket one too many times. What do I need to change about how I carry myself in a supermarket so that I'm not always nudging people in the supermarket? These are all the corrective actions that must be considered and evaluated and, if possible, implemented so as to avoid negative situations in the future. Now, to be clear, nobody has yet lived long enough to go through a day where they're not marginally or significantly inconveniencing the people around them all of the time. We are human, we are chaotic, and our societies are even more chaotic. And it's always going to be the case that we're going to be inconveniencing and harming people around us all the time. The quest here is to identify particular patterns of behavior which arise over and over again, or have the potential of arising over and over again, that harm people, the people around us, the people that we care about, and to make sure that we adjust those patterns of behavior to minimize or eliminate that harm. So we can never eliminate all harm forever, but we can cut down on the amount of harm that we're doing to the people around us by improving our behavior, by improving our choices, by taking on board systems and approaches that can help us to make our lives more efficient, and so on as we go. Once you figured out what the plan is, what the changes are you need to make in order to avoid those situations in future, you want to devise a plan to implement those changes. Sometimes the plan is to just do the change, but sometimes it requires a bit more effort than that. If the changes that is required is a significant alteration to the way that you interact with your coworkers, that might require a bit more work than simply setting a reminder in your phone. So it's about figuring out what work needs to be done in order to make and implement that change. And maybe it's going to take some time. And if that's true, then that's fine too. But that brings us to the next step here under avoiding repetition, which is to communicate that plan to the victim, to make sure that they know that you've done something wrong, which we've already covered, that you are responsible for doing the thing, that you want to take corrective action, and that you want to avoid doing this kind of thing in the future. And this is what you're going to do to try and avoid doing that. Now, you don't need their sign off for it, but it's important that they know that you're making that plan. And then, of course, the fourth step under avoiding repetition is to execute the plan, actually do the thing that you're wanting to do. Now, it's possible that your victim may have feedback or suggestions or recommendations about how to modify your plan, or they might disregard it altogether, and that's fine. It's worth listening to them about that. And again, if they don't feel satisfied with the fact that you are taking steps to avoid those kinds of situations in the future, well, as long as you're doing your best to fix it, then that's all you can kind of do. The victim of the situation isn't the only person who's watching this. They're not the only person who is able to see the choices that you're making and the actions that you're taking. So even if you have irreparably damaged the relationship with the victim, there are other people around you who will think more highly of you for having made the effort and for actually executing the plan that you've committed to do. In that entire process, there are some common pitfalls that we all succumb to. It's not an indication of poor character that we succumb to these pitfalls. It's just natural human nature. But it's worth being aware of them and trying to avoid them. Excuse me, sip of my beverage. All right, so the first pitfall we often fall into is attempting to minimize the issue. Basically, it wasn't that bad, right? It wasn't that bad. We didn't hurt you that badly. Oh, I just nudged you a little bit. It's not even bruised. It's not even bleeding. You'll be fine. It's not really up to you to determine or to decide how bad the thing was that happened. That is ultimately the victim's prerogative to determine how severe the situation is. So as the person who's done it, trying to minimize the harm, it's not really your choice to do that. Now you can decide, and the people around you can decide if the victim is perhaps milking it, perhaps being unreasonable, and that's a real possibility. Some people, it's true. Some people with disordered thinking will try to maximize their victimhood status in the minds of people around them by milking any negative situation that comes up. That's a risk that can happen, and so one has to bear that in mind when going through processes like this. But that said, generally speaking, it is the victim's prerogative to determine how badly they have been harmed by the situation. So minimizing it doesn't help. It just makes you look worse. The next pitfall is blaming others or the circumstances that you find yourself in. Now, while it may well be true that other people were involved too, it may well be true that in the circumstances you felt that it was the natural and logical thing to do, but that is not an excuse. It still means that you made the choice that led to the harm, and you are still accountable insofar as the choice was yours to make. So whether it felt like the right thing to do, whether it felt like other people were also involved, that doesn't absolve you of responsibility. It means that they also are responsible, and they should be going through their own 3 R's process, but that doesn't erase or excuse your involvement or your choices or your actions. The next one is hiding behind ignorance or incompetence. Oh, I didn't know, or oh, I couldn't do any better. Now, this is a tricky one because, frankly, sometimes you didn't know. And if there was no reasonable way in which you could have known that your actions might have hurt somebody, then, frankly, you need to take that into account. But if you should have known, so let's use the birthday example here. If you have never known what somebody's birthday was ever in the history of your relationship with the person, no, it's never come up in conversation, not even once. They don't show it on their Facebook profile. You've never had a conversation about birthdays. You had no reasonable way to know that it was the person's birthday. And then they're cross with you that you forgot their birthday. That might be a little bit unreasonable on their part because it sounds like they've taken every step to try and conceal that information from you. But if there was a way for you to know, perhaps they do have it on their Facebook profile. Perhaps it is in your calendar. Perhaps there's a birthday list on the bulletin board in your office, or perhaps you are the HR person who processes everybody's applications to join the team, and you saw their birthday on their application form, which is often the kind of information that applications forms will ask for. If there was a way for you to have that information and you disregarded it, chose not to remember it, or just forgot, that's not an excuse. You had a way to find that information. You just didn't. You didn't care enough to look. That is your choice. That is the harm that you did. That's what happened. And that is the thing that requires corrective action. So simply being ignorant of a fact is not in itself an excuse, unless there was no way for you to have that information. Or being incompetence, this is just something that I can't do. I can't do this thing. I can't keep track of these things. That's probably not true either. And every day that AI becomes more advanced, it becomes less and less of an excuse because we have more tools at our fingertips that can enhance our capabilities to make sure that we're able to do the right thing, make the right choices, keep track of things like birthdays. That's just an ongoing situation. I'm seeing in the chat a word called weaponized incompetence. Exactly. That's an even worse example of what we're talking about here. It's possible to play up the fact that you are incompetent, or even mislead people into thinking that you are incompetent in something that you're perfectly competent for, and then using that as an excuse for getting away with treating people badly, and that's just not acceptable. The next pitfall we want to avoid is hiding behind. Oh no, we've spoken about that. Hiding behind ignorance or incompetence. The next one is delaying the response until forced to act. If you have wronged somebody, as the moment that you realize that that has happened, that is the time to act. That is the time to reach out to the person and say, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I've hurt you in this way. Sometimes it'll be obvious. Again, the elbow in the supermarket, it's obvious that that just happened. Perhaps if you've said somebody that hurt somebody's feelings, it might not be clear right away because maybe they just go quiet and in the noise of the conversation, it's not obvious to you that that person has hurt feelings, but it will become pretty clear before too long. And once you've realized that you've done something to hurt somebody's feelings, that is the moment to act, to reach out to them and initiate the 3 R's process. Waiting until they call you out for something later on when there were no signs, where there was no indication. No, that's not correct. Waiting for them to call you out later or for somebody else to call you out, even though you knew you had done the wrong thing, that's not okay, because that just means that you're being forced to act by somebody else instead of taking responsibility and being the grown-up and doing it yourself. So each one of these pitfalls will erode the respect of your peers and undermines your standing as a member of any community, but especially as a Starfleet officer. Okay, I'm just going to have to ignore that one now because he's wandered over there again, even though he was in his comfy bed, which is what he was asking for. So he's just going to keep shouting at me from across the room, and that's just what we're going to have to deal with. So apologies for that noise. All right, so the common pitfalls, engaging in any of these will deteriorate your standing in your community, in your group, whether it's Starfleet, your day job, your friends, your family. And the more you do this kind of thing, allowing yourself to fall into these pitfalls, yes, fall into the pits, that's the metaphor, the more it's going to erode people's perceptions of you. Because accountability is a strength, not a weakness. So addressing your mistakes head on, again, requires courage and emotional resilience. This is something that people can see, that you've made the choices to take on that responsibility, because it's a difficult thing to do. Because facing the negative perceptions and consequences and feelings of the people around you, especially if you are the one who has caused those negative outcomes, is emotionally taxing. But being able to face up to that reality is an indicator of strength and courage. And true leaders, which if you're a Starfleet officer, that's what you are. True leaders lead by example, which is showing that taking responsibility is an opportunity for growth, to become better, to eliminate your bad behavior, to improve yourself, to become a better part of the team. So opportunity for growth and not for shame. So it might feel like taking responsibility for behaving badly is going to be a shameful thing. People are going to look down on you. They're going to think bad things about you. And that might be true in the short term. But in the long term, they're going to think positively of you for making positive changes to bring about a better situation for everybody. The Starfleet ethos teaches us that the willingness to confront our own failures is a mark of true character. We're going to talk more about examples of that in a moment. And practicing the art of taking accountability, as I expressed in the 3 R's, leads to actual growth of character. It's like building a muscle for mission readiness, right? Actual growth of character, because you're identifying areas in your personality, in your behavior, in the things that you do that need improvement. And by taking action to fix those things, you're making yourself a better person. And not only that, but you're also engaging your anterior cingulate cortex, which is my new favorite part of the brain. It's the part of the brain that makes you choose to do difficult things, even though they're difficult. And the more you do that, the more you choose the difficult thing, the easier it gets to choose to do difficult things, because you're training that as a muscle. And that's an important part of mission readiness. Taking accountability, apologizing for the things that you did, and making restitution for the things that you did are all part of mission readiness. They make us better people. So because we're a Star Trek group, let's look to Star Trek for some examples of these things. So to be clear, the 3 R's framework doesn't exist in the Star Trek universe. That's something I invented. But we can look at some examples of people taking accountability for their actions. First one that springs to mind is in the original series episode, the Galileo 7. So Commander Spock is in command of the shuttle Galileo, which crashes on a planet, and they need to try and get off the planet. They're not able to communicate with the Enterprise. And the other 7, there were 7 people there, including Spock, so the other 6 become increasingly frustrated with Spock's refusal to admit that their emotional reality, their emotional state, is something that he is, at least in part, responsible for as the commander of the mission. And he makes some decisions based entirely on what he sees as the logical course of action that the other 6 strongly and vehemently disagree with. So much so that it actually starts to put them in jeopardy. He destabilizes the entire command structure of that little ship and that little crew, such that the survival of everybody is placed in jeopardy. But fortunately, before too many casualties are suffered, Spock is able to examine his own preconceptions, his own ideas, his own logic, and comes to terms with the fact that his actions were not optimal, in that he was hurting the feelings and thereby deteriorating the team dynamic of the Galileo 7. And only by acknowledging and coming to terms with and making corrective action for his poor choices were they able to get that shuttle off the ground of that planet and send a signal that the Enterprise was able to detect. So the lesson we derive from there is that accountability means recognizing both the tangible and the human aspects of our decisions. Doing harm isn't necessarily only a physical thing, it can be an emotional thing, which could have an impact both on an individual, but also on team dynamics among a crew, a work team, family, any group of people. Affecting the emotions of one person can also affect the emotions of the people around them, and that is an impact and an outcome that needs to be taken accountability for by the person who's making those choices. Another example is the Next Generation episode Family, which is the episode immediately following the two-parter Best of Both Worlds, in which Captain Picard is assimilated by the Borg, and his knowledge and experience are used by the Borg to attack Earth. First, Starfleet at the Battle of Wolf 359, killing thousands of people, and then moving on to Earth, where they very nearly assimilate the entire planet, if not stopped at the very last moment. Although Picard, again, had been kidnapped and taken advantage of by the Borg, he still felt like he was in some way responsible for what happened, because there are probably choices he could have made that could have resulted in that situation not occurring or not unfolding the way it happened. So in this episode, the episode Family, we see him returning home to his the place where he was born, the Chateau Picard in Navarre, France, where he meets up with some of his biological family, his brother Robert, his wife and son, where they can, and he's busy processing his various emotional responses to that situation, among which is the enormous guilt that he feels for having been at least in part responsible for the Battle of Wolf 359. Now, the enormity of that guilt and the fact that he was being exploited by the Borg at the time left him with very little emotional outlet to be able to process that. But what he could do in that moment was he could process and do what he could to mend the harm that he'd caused to his brother and his family when he, Jean-Luc Picard, had decided to leave the chateau and become a Starfleet officer all those years ago. He could talk to his brother, confide in him, try to rebuild that fraternal bond that they shared as boys, and try to mend that relationship so that he was no longer burdened by that additional guilt of having upset and permanently tarnished his relationship with his brother and carried that with him into space. So although he couldn't fix his guilt from the Borg assimilation, he could fix the harm that he did to his brother. Now, again, becoming a Starfleet officer was the right decision. It's not that Picard did anything wrong in doing so, but he had to acknowledge the fact that his choices had effects on the people around him, and it was up to him to take responsibility for those choices and do what he could to restore the emotional balance to his biological family. And we also see that in future incarnations. So in Star Trek First Contact and in Star Trek Picard Season 3, we see Picard further processing and further attempting to make right the wrongs that he felt responsible for in that initial Borg incursion by striking back against the Borg and making sure that they were no longer a threat to the Federation. Third example is one that's coming up in our daily devotionals in a couple of days. I think it might be tomorrow or the next day, which is the first 2 episodes of Star Trek Discovery, specifically the Vulcan Hello and the Battle at the Binary Stars. And in this incident, Commander Michael Burnham, first officer of the USS Shinjo, commits what is effectively a mutiny because she feels very strongly that the ship has to undertake a specific action in order to defend itself from what she believes to be an imminent attack by the Klingons. Now, she is right, as it turns out. There was an imminent attack by the Klingons. But what she was wrong about was that she wasn't going to be able to defuse the situation by striking first. What had happened was that they were being lured into a trap, which was the inevitable beginning of the Earth-Klingon War. But without having complete knowledge of the situation, she made some choices which damaged the careers of officers around her, as well as costing arguably thousands of lives. At least it was believed by everybody else at the time that many, many people died that day because of the choice that she made. Now, once the battle was over, she was arrested. In fact, before even the battle was over, she was arrested, confined to the brig, and was tried for mutiny, the first mutiny in Starfleet history, and was sentenced to whatever she was sentenced to do. We then follow her career through the following months as she is transferred as a prisoner consultant to the USS Discovery, where she is forced to physically atone for the actions that she did. She is still a prisoner, but now serving out her duty without the privileges of rank or any of the advantages that her career up until that point had afforded her. And she recognized that it was her choices that led to that situation. It led to the deaths of hundreds, thousands of people, including her friend and mentor, Philippa Georgiou. And she was guilty of that. And she had to do whatever she needed to do in order to make that situation right. And she was prepared to do that. Although she was sullen and grumpy about it the whole time, she did what she needed to do. She was prepared to take that accountability. She even pled guilty in her court-martial hearing. She didn't even offer a defense. So what we learn from there is that accepting responsibility, even when it carries heavy consequences, so in her case, it was a drastic change to her lifestyle forevermore, it's the first step towards redemption. And also that you don't have to like it. It doesn't have to be fun for you. It doesn't have to be comfortable for you. But it doesn't mean it's any less necessary. Another sip of my beverage. Right. Okay, so in conclusion, accountability doesn't end with admitting fault, although that is an important aspect to it. It's crucial to admit fault. It's necessary, but not sufficient. It continues with making things right and from learning from the experience. Apologies are part of the process, not the entire thing. And apologies aren't even necessarily always required or desired, because accountability is much more important and a much larger process than simply saying, I'm sorry. As members of the Dauntless, we strive to embody the Starfleet values of integrity, responsibility, and continuous self-improvement, which means embracing an active way of taking accountability for our negative actions. And in the end, it's not our mistakes that define us, but how we respond to making them. Okay, all right, let's see if there are any questions that I need to see. I'm going to jump back to the beginning of the discussion. Anything tagged for me there? No, nothing tagged. Okay, fantastic. Anything on YouTube? I'm not seeing anything there. Amazing. All right, so with no direct questions, we can move on to the closing statement, which is to say, taking accountability is not about blame. It's about respect. Respect for those we've wronged, respect for the truth, and respect for the officer we aspire to be. Thank you. That is all for today. You are dismissed. Swart out.